Okay, so I'm actually going to make this video. I've been thinking of doing it for a long time, but I wanted to be in a place where I could really speak on this topic from a very holistic and wide viewpoint. So I think I'm kind of there now. And I also was up all night thinking about just speaking on it and using my voice to help people, because there's not a lot of information out there for those of us who have received the diagnosis of interstitial cystitis, or the liagnosis, as I like to call it. So I just wanted to make this video to let people know what I think the very first thing that you need to know when you have been told that you have IC. And that to me is to not believe it. But not to, discredit your symptoms, but to understand that there are a vast amount of things that could be causing your symptoms. So the first thing is that the term IC, interstitial cystitis, is a placeholder. It is also a term, a blanket term, for the symptoms. But it's a placeholder because there's a lot of things that could be causing the symptoms, and it's up to you to do the work and get control of your thoughts and remember that you don't have to believe that you've been signed up for a lifelong condition that's never going to go away, because it is 100% not true. I guess I'm going to say 100% not true in 90% of cases. At least that's what the numbers say. There's some debate that IC is a thing, that it's a disease of the bladder where it's chronically inflamed and you're gonna have to live with it for the rest of your life. And I guess there's some people who experience that, but I don't know what their root cause was. I don't know whether they took steps to see if there was any other explanation, or if they just took the diagnosis that the doctor gave them. It was most likely just a failed attempt of conventional medicine to come up with a term it describes the symptoms, but the symptoms themselves have many explanations. So I wanted to give you some of those explanations as to what they could be. And I'll start with maybe the top few, 3 to 5, that I've heard through all my research. And I have gone down the rabbit hole of the internet and blogs and groups and forums and articles and studies and research and lots of YouTube videos. It's not as much support on YouTube as you would want. But there are a lot of women, many women, who have found solutions, who have gotten better, and it has taken time. There's no getting around that part. And that's the hardest part is not knowing when you're going to find your solution, not knowing when the steps you're taking to get better are going to start to pay off. But you just need to start taking those steps. And the first step is just knowing that your diagnosis is most likely inaccurate. You'll hear it over and over again throughout your research that IC or true IC or IC that has not yet been, or the root cause for it was not discovered. So people who did just accept that diagnosis and live with it, or people who got the diagnosis and tried to find root causes but couldn't, I don't know what explains that 10%. But when you get your diagnosis, the first thing is to know that there are explanations for it, and that you need to know that. You need to know that it is most likely nothing wrong with your bladder. There's a lot of information out there, and even like the IC network and IC associations, they're starting to reconfigure their way of thinking about it, and in a lot of cases are becoming aware and are starting to share information that it's something that is happening where your bladder is basically an innocent bystander, and your bladder or urethra area is where you feel these symptoms that are just a result of something else that's happening in the body. So that's just the first thing that I just want everyone to know, and I wish someone would have told me, that there's a lot of things that could explain the symptoms. And I wish I would have been told that right out the gate. But right out the gate, I was told that I had this condition and that I was going to have it for the rest of my life, when I literally woke up overnight with a UTI, which had happened to me several times before, and I took antibiotics and it went away. But the day before I woke up with the symptoms, I was perfectly fine. I woke up with a UTI and it was tested. I had bacteria with the dipstick test, got the culture test. It was all bacteria, took the antibiotics, and the symptoms didn't go away. So you'll hear that a lot. And that's I think most people start out that way. So the next thing that you need to do is know, I would say, what some of those root causes can be. Number one, it's an infection, which happens to be my case, and sometimes it can be other things that overlap. But one of the things that I found out about myself sort of late in the game is that I had an infection. From the beginning, I had an infection and took antibiotics, didn't go away. Then, I went to a urologist. This is over the course of about 6 weeks. I finally got a specialized test done, because dipstick tests that they give you like in the little clinic or urgent care, wherever you go, like the first line of treatment, or treaters that you see, they do the dipstick test, and mine was positive, and they gave me antibiotics. And then if you still have symptoms after that, then most likely they'll culture it to see what kind of bacteria it is. Well, when I got mine cultured, they said that there was no bacteria, but I still had symptoms. So I got a second opinion. They found blood in my urine. I had nitrites in my urine, and that's an indication of, I had leukocytes in my urine, not nitrites. I had leukocytes in my urine, which is white blood cells, and your white blood cells don't typically hang out in high numbers unless there's a reason for them to be there, because they are your army in your body, so they're there to fight something. And I had those and blood indication, all things that usually spell infection, but I was told that there was no bacteria. So I went to a urologist and I got a specialized test done, and that's one thing that you're gonna need to do. Just do it, and you may have to do it a few times like I have. It is called a microgen DX test, so microgen DNA diagnostics test. So this is a test that basically just sees if there's any bacteria in your urine, not through culturing, because culturing is at least 50% inaccurate. It's an antiquated form of testing for bacteria. The dipstick test is even more inaccurate. So the microgen DX test will let you know through DNA sequencing what is in your urine, and it will identify bacteria, and then not only that, it will indicate what that bacteria is susceptible. So in my case, in my case, it was susceptible to a few things, but none of the antibiotics that I actually was given. And by this point, I had already been given 3 rounds of antibiotics. And they didn't work. So none of the antibiotics I was given in the very beginning for my UTI killed the bacteria. But at this stage, I was already told that I had IC. So I got that test, found out that I had that infection, took more antibiotics to clear it, to attempt to clear it, but it didn't. It didn't go away, or my symptoms didn't go away. I got more testing. You know, this kind of, my story is, it's been all over the place because this is a very, very confusing diagnosis to get. So I was scrambling around trying to figure out what to do, how to eat, how to think, who to see, who to believe, where to get information. It was fucked up. And I'm still going through it, you know, but I'm a lot better, and I know I'm gonna get all the way there. But anyway, I have an infection. So even 6 months later, I found out that I still had an infection. It was Enterococcus faecalis, which just so happens to be the bacteria that it's one of the most infamous bacteria for creating biofilms. So you can have an infection that can't be picked up through culture. It can't be picked up through the dipstick test. It needs to be picked up through highly specialized new technology type testing. There's a couple companies that do it, but Microgen DX does it. They charged me $200 for the test. You absolutely need to get that test done. The problem with waiting a long time or being misdiagnosed and being sent off to let your infection make a permanent home where it's infecting, the problem with that is that now you are talking about embedded infections, and you are talking about biofilm infections. Bacteria, especially Enterococcus, can make biofilms, which are protective layers. Basically, think of living under a dome where when you take antibiotics that you're going to take for like 7 days, it's not going to do the trick anymore. It may have done it in the very beginning when they were planktonic bacteria, like floating around, but once they become embedded in your tissue, or create biofilms because you didn't get the right antibiotics to begin with, you have to treat them differently. So there's some articles on this that you can look at. I guess I'll link them. I don't really do YouTube, but I'm going to find those articles. I will link them. But there's tons of women who have had to go on very long courses of antibiotics. I am doing it naturally, and there's a ton of herbs and tinctures of roots and leaves and plants and bark of all different kinds of herbs that will kill bacteria that are safe to take for a long time. This typically, what I see usually takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months to treat. I'm on month 2.5 right now. I'm 6 rounds or so of antibiotics in, like conventional antibiotics, and they didn't help me at all. So I'm 2.5 months in on natural antibiotics, antimicrobials, and you can do it that way. And I have heard and read countless and talked to countless women have gone through this and shared their stories on various places where I've looked and have gotten all the way better. And life for them is just as it was before they got the fucking UTI that was misdiagnosed as IC, who spent too long suffering because maybe they believed it, they were confused, they didn't have good information, didn't know where to go, but eventually found their way and got testing, the right kind, and eventually got better. So, it could be an infection. And if it started with a fucking UTI, then it's probably a fucking UTI. And doctors need to get their shit together and find ways. Not find ways. There is a way. They don't need to even find it. It exists. They just need to start employing the best testing that there is out there and stop sending women off with a fucking bullshit diagnosis telling them that they're going to have these UTI-like symptoms for the rest of their lives when they have a fucking UTI. Anyway, it's a real thing. So I'll put some links in. The next thing that it is very likely to be is pelvic floor dysfunction. Never fucking heard of it before all of this. But no matter what your cause is, you need to get into pelvic floor physical therapy. It's expensive. It's expensive for me. My insurance doesn't cover it, but I work overtime to pay for that shit. I go once a week, and I have been for 6 months now. So pelvic floor therapy is a special, wonderful therapy that helps a lot of women, some women, within weeks. This within just a couple weeks. Some it takes a few months, depending on what all of your causes are. Even if you have, like, I have an infection, but I also am doing pelvic floor therapy because as a result of the infection, my pelvic floor is fucked up. It is going like this because there's inflammation and pain, and it's like, and pelvic floor therapy helps it to relax. The problem with it is that even if you have no other issues, if your pelvic floor is doing this, you will feel like you have a UTI or a yeast infection or just general pain, like you have a ball or something, or movements jar your vagina or urethra. It can hurt to have sex. Pelvic floor dysfunction covers a lot of things, but what it's capable of causing can feel exactly like a UTI. So pelvic floor therapy helps to relax all of that. You can stop the tightening, stop the constriction of your tissues, and there's like a grip load of muscles by your vagina, your urethra, your booty hole. All of that is surrounded by a lot of muscles, which are like the epicenter of the female anatomy. I mean, our shit is complicated and capable of a lot. We have babies, we have periods, we have lots of hormones, and all of that is harnessed, and all of that empowerment and everything, it's just carried in the pelvic floor. So if you're going through hormonal changes, your pelvic floor is affected. If you're on your cycle, your pelvic floor is affected. If you have a UTI, it's affected. If you have a yeast infection, it's affected. If you have constipation, it's affected. If you sit too long, it's affected. If you exercise too hard, it's affected. If you don't breathe the right way, it's affected. If you have anxiety, it's affected. It's crazy how much shit can affect your pelvic floor, and without you knowing it, it can just creep up on you, and you can have major dysfunction in your pelvic floor that can cause symptoms that feel exactly like a UTI. It blew my mind at first, but now that I've been in therapy and I've learned about it a lot, it's a real thing. And I feel like every woman should know about it. I feel like the moment you get a UTI, your doctor should be like, listen, you better make sure you don't get no more UTIs, because you could have a chronic one and you could get this and this and this and this and this and this, you know. But you live and you learn. Anyway, so it could be pelvic floor dysfunction. So that's what that is. And the next thing is it could be hormones. I don't know. They say older women, but most of the stories that I've heard and case studies that I've looked at have been in women that are like 35, even some that are like 23. I was 35 when this started. So I was actually like for sure there for a while. I got my hormones tested and everything, but I was for sure there for a while that this was hormonal related, because when I was ovulating, I had like my very first few hours without pain was on like an ovulation day. And then the next month on the ovulation day, I had another like block of time without pain. And in the beginning, my pain was absolutely constant. So I was sure that hormones had something to do with it, but it didn't have anything to do with it for me as far as I know. I mean, my naturopath tested my hormones and said that they are fine. So, but there's a lot of women who say once they balance their hormones and do pelvic floor therapy, you know, things like that, kind of combination tactics, that their symptoms went away. The other thing is, let's see, I would say the next most popular thing that I've seen is gut health, probably. So you can have something called referred pain, and this can happen in your pelvic floor too. Like people can have like a tight muscle that's closer to their bum, to their anus, and then feel all of that pain in their urethra and feel like they have a UTI. And once you tighten out or loosen up, you know, rectally this muscle in your pelvic floor by your booty, your burning pain can go away, you know. So that happens. But your intestines can also refer pain to your bladder. So if you're having any sort of overgrowth of bacteria, maybe like an infection in your an overgrowth of bacteria or an infection of some sort in your colon, it could be referring pain to your bladder, because those areas all share a bunch of nerves and the same tissue. I mean, when you think of like your bladder, your vagina, your urethra, your uterus, your intestines, you think of everything as kind of like separate, and it's all sitting there next to each other, but it is a separate entity. But that's just not true. Everything in there is like, yeah, your bladder may be over here, but it's got lots of tissue spreading off of it that's like moving to, it's like wrapped around your uterus, it's wrapped around, you know, your intestines, and the nerves and tissue is all shared. So there's something that can happen when you, I don't know, maybe if you've ever felt like maybe pain here in your neck and you get symptoms in your hands, your fingers tingles, kind of like an example. So the nerves are shared. So if you're having something going on in your intestines, it could be referring pain to your bladder. Also, if you have shitty gut health, your intestinal walls can have holes in them. Not like holes, but basically the lining gets really thin and there's permeability, meaning that things from your intestines can just kind of pass through the intestinal lining. That can include bacteria. It can include foods. Gluten is like a huge offender. So that's why a lot of people who have the bladder symptoms will say like, hey, I went off gluten and my bladder pain went away. I was gluten-free when this started, so I was just like, fuck, that can't be my root cause. But so SIBO, leaky gut. SIBO is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. So I've heard of women who treated their SIBO through natural antimicrobials with a naturopath. They got better. I think it's called like pelvic sanity. Physical therapists are like leading the game in researching and offering solutions and listening to women who have gotten better and taking them seriously and saying, what did you do to get better? And now let's like trial that on a bunch of women who are here at our office for pelvic pain. So one of them did a research or study, and 50% of the women who were there for bladder, urethral, urinary tract pain, they would put them on a diet, which most likely is going to be something similar to the autoimmune protocol or the paleo diet. So super clean. I was already eating paleo when this started for me, so I was just like, well, shit, that's probably not me. They'll put them on some good diet with some good detoxers and some good intestinal lining builders and some like binders that can kind of go in and gather up all the muck in you and dead bacteria as you kill them off, because you'll take antimicrobials as well. All of this is to get your gut bacteria under control. And so a lot of women said they got better doing that. I think it was 50% of the women in that study got better just once they cleaned up their gut. So eating fermented foods, eating lots of vegetables. Basically the idea is that you want to feed the good bacteria in your body and starve the bad pathogens, microorganisms in your body, yeast, parasites, bacteria. And bad bacteria tend to feed off of shit. So they feed off, not shit, they all feed off your shit, but they feed off of shitty food. So processed food, white flour, white sugar, artificial foods, meat. So they feed off of that. You think of it, you eat an animal and bacteria break it down, decompose it. So the kind of bacteria that you consume when you eat meat are the kind that can decompose an animal. So what do you think they're doing to you if you're promoting the growth of that kind of bacteria? So I learned a lot about how to eat. I thought I was a great eater before. I was. I ate very well. So none of it was gut health or anything like that for me, but it didn't stop me from going fully raw vegan for a couple months and vegan for 6 months. And not just like, vegan, I'm going to eat a bunch of chips, vegan and sugar. It was like vegan vegetables, like just vegetables. I didn't even eat grains for a while. Anyway, so gut health. Let's see. The other one is I heard about it a lot. So I have to mention it. Was mold exposure. There is a lady who is on YouTube. I found her. I think she's like a nutritionist or something like that, but you can probably find her. She's wearing like a white lab coat. She talks about IC and other health issues, viruses and stuff like that. But she was diagnosed with IC, but she started having like a lot of health issues. She got like chronic fatigue syndrome. She just like started feeling really shitty. But she took pretty good care of herself. And after doing all kinds of stuff to figure out what was wrong with her, she eventually found out that the place that she was living in had mold behind the walls, and she moved out of that shithole, and what do you know, all her symptoms went away. And she's on YouTube, so you can check that out, but she's not alone. There's a lot of women that I have heard tell their story, and on like forums, articles, just various places, because I went down that rabbit hole, and I found there's a lot of them. So mold exposure. So I got my fucking house tested for mold, $350. I did everything. I went to, I'm not even gonna say, I'm gonna make another video on that, but and so then outside of that, I just want to say, just list off some of the other like really one-off things that people were like, this is what I figured out caused my symptoms, pulled this out of my life or addressed it, and I'm good. I've been better for 10 years, 20 years, you know? And I'm sure the people that got better 30, 40, 50 years ago are not on the internet. You know, they're retired, they're old school. They probably ain't on YouTube making videos. In fact, I know they're not. The lady in the lab coat was the oldest lady that I saw on YouTube talking about it as a survivor, you know, a fighter, someone that didn't give up, who fought for themselves. So, so breast implants, strangely, a lot of women were like, as soon as I got my breast, it started after I got my breast implants, went and got my explants, got better. IUDs, started after I got an IUD, got it removed. Of course, it's not that cut and dry. It was like I started after I got my IUD, didn't think anything of it, but then had symptoms and went to this person and this person. They told me how to IC. I changed my diet. I did this. I cried. I was suicidal. I, you know, went through this test and that test and saw this specialist and that specialist, you know. And then one day I was just like, oh man, I need to take my IUD out for unrelated reasons, and oh shit, my symptoms went away. So IUD, I heard of, chiropractic care. Women have been getting better through, I guess, maybe pinched nerves, things like that, that they addressed through chiropractic care. And maybe went because their back started hurting, because you can have pinched nerves causing symptoms in your bladder, but your back don't need to hurt, you know. And then maybe later your back does start hurting and you get like the injection. People have gotten those, and oh wow, my bladder symptoms went away. Chiropractic care, oh wow, went away. So there's that. Also, what else? One lady, red wine, drank it every day, stopped drinking it, switched to white wine, never had an issue again. Another one, artificial sweetener. A lot of people have said that they were big on artificial sweeteners or whatever, and they just stopped taking them, or they just cut them out of their diet. There's a lot, but those are just some of the ones that I just decided to share with you. You know, there's so many more. It could just be some random ass shit that literally has nothing to do with your bladder. And I found out that mine is an infection. Anyway, my phone died, so I'm just gonna wrap this up. There's answers out there for you. You can get better, and there are a lot of women who have done it. If you find the information in this video helpful, then I guess I'll see how that goes and make more. But this is what I have to say for now. So I hope it helps. Bye.